Welcome to the Economics Design Podcast. I'm Rob Carroll, Senior Gaming Consultant for Economics Design. A lot of our podcasts cover the work that we do with the design and implementation of blockchain economies. But sometimes we're lucky to have a guest that can talk about how those economies work in the real world. Today, I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Luke Barwikowski, CEO of the popular gaming site Pixels.xyz, to join me to talk about their platform and his experience in Web3 game development.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to come on to this podcast. I've been following you guys for a while. Huge fan.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and some of the reports you guys have been super helpful for us even.
It's great to hear. Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about your story and your background. How did you get into gaming and reach this level of CEO that you have today?
Yeah, totally. So my background is I'm Luke. I'm the founder of Pixels. I wear the CEO and the CTO hat at Pixels. A solo founder of Pixels as well too. Some background on me is I started coding when I was like 12 years old. I started making video games, funny enough, in this program called Game Maker. Had its own little scripting language. And then, I taught myself web development in high school as well. I went to study at the University of Michigan. I studied computer science and economics. And eventually went into the real world doing software engineering for a little bit. So eventually I left my job as a software engineer and I started doing some consulting with early stage companies. I was really focused on the DevOps side of things, helping them get solid infrastructure set up and getting their infrastructure built as code with AWS, Google Cloud, all of that. And as I was doing some of that work, I started what became Pixels. So Pixels actually didn't used to be a Web3 game. It used to be a virtual spaces and event platform into Web3 gaming. We had this really interesting tech that was like these virtual persistent spaces, added on video chatting and spatial audio on top of that as well. And we kind of built this metaverse technology before that was even like a buzzword that was going around essentially. We sold this tech to enterprise companies. We sold it to Apple, Uber, Rippling, Twitter. We had some decent names that were using this tech. But what we found is, it was a cool business. But what we found with that business was it was actually a very difficult business. The key lesson from that was that when we gave people virtual spaces, the usage was really low. They would use them for one-off events. And the best case scenario that we saw was that these people would use these spaces for about an hour once a week, and then they wouldn't use them again. So very unpredictable revenue, very unpredictable usage. And we knew we needed to pivot. What you saw a lot of those companies pivot into was remote work because the business model is predictable usage. It's SaaS. It's an easier use case there. We experimented with that. And, we built like a virtual office inside of this tech stack that we had, like virtual desks that you could sit at and your teammates could come up to you. And I tried using that product and I absolutely hated using it. I would have been very sad if I kept going down that route. So we tried some other stuff out. And the use case that ended up working was we put a game mechanic on top of this tech stack. And somebody spent all night playing this game and it was really bad. But that was like the personal conviction I needed to move this tech that we had built into gaming. And at the same time, we had this NFT collection that was using our platform as a meetup spot for once a week. And we started digging into their use case a bit more. What we found with NFTs at that time, this is about like September 2021. There was all of these NFTs out there that had monetized users, or at least like a high LTV per user. They'd spent like a lot on these virtual collectibles, right? And then two, they had really strong communities and they had nothing to do inside of these communities besides hang out on Discord, right? So gaming and this insight together actually led us to pursuing that a lot more heavily. And we released a demo of a Web3 game where we actually did one of the first avatar integrations of an NFT collection into our game. So you could walk around as your NFT inside of our game. And those two things together actually got us a decent amount of attention in Web3. And we used that to launch our own NFT collection. We raised a small pre-seed round led by Animoca Brands. And then we started building. Pixels is about 2 years old in its current form right now in terms of a Web3 game. And we've been taking a build and public approach. Our approach is much more building like a startup than it is a game studio, where we believe that we still don't really know what's going to work in Web3 gaming yet. And the value out of Web3 is still kind of to be determined. So it requires a lot of iteration to kind of find out what will actually work and what won't. So we prefer to test things a lot to test with our community basically, and just take a bunch of risk and have more shots on goal. So yeah, this approach has been working pretty well for us. We have a community of people who have been here for 2 years now, which is insane. We've kind of watched this game and ecosystem grow, and we've been able to make some moves that have gotten us like a bit more attention in the space recently too. Right now, Pixels is sitting at about like 75,000 real daily active users, about like 100,000 daily active wallets.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we've done this all on basically no marketing spend too. It's just been this community-first approach, just building public approach, and really experimenting with incentive design and what Web3 gaming can do. So for us, what we're kind of seeing with Web3 is it can be really competitive against Web2 games if you set up incentive structures properly. If you try to innovate in ways that Web2 games can actually take advantage of. And yeah, that's kind of the core thesis of what we're doing. So yeah, on our end, we have some more exciting stuff coming up soon. We're about to start to really experiment with like token incentives when it comes to growth and user acquisition and monetization and all of that. But yeah, it's just been a fun ride, a wild ride. Web3 is hard to build in.
Oh, definitely.
Been fun.
That's great to hear. What was the NFT project that you guys kicked off with?
Yeah, it's called Pixel Beast. The second one we did was Chibi Dinos. The third one was Lazy Lion. So Pixel Beast, it's funny. It was set up by this VC that was basically like, his name's Yohei, and he's doing a bunch of AI stuff now.
Yeah.
He made this like project called Baby AGI. But his approach to VC is really interesting, where when he goes into a space, he wants to actually build it at first and test and iterate some things on himself. And he built out this NFT community, and his intention was just like it as a learning experience. But yeah, he actually ended up joining around and kind of set all of that up too. And he's been one of our like most helpful investors.
That's amazing. I know I've worked for a couple of bootstrapped companies in the past, and when you get those first few checks in there and you see that kind of validation from the market, it definitely makes the long nights worth it.
Oh yeah. No, it was brutal being in the space before, and then yeah, Web3 just started clicking a bit more. It was finally like after a year and a half of working on something that just wasn't really working the way that we wanted to, when the Web3 stuff started clicking, and it's like, okay, there's something here, there's something interesting. We started getting some more validation behind that. It was such a good motivator.
That's awesome. That's a great story. So I'd love to kind of dig into a little bit more of the game and obviously the economy behind that. That's kind of what we specialize on here. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on tokens and on how Web3 games can approach using tokens and using this blockchain technology to as you say, build these vibrant communities that are really engaged.
Yeah. So we've been building a game for the last 2 years. We've still kind of structured it in more like releases. So we had a pre-alpha for a while, and that was a very bad game. But then we released the alpha version of our game just over a year ago. And that was when we started to really focus on like the core systems that we have into the game now and benchmark it against Web2 games. If you haven't played Pixels or looked into it, what the game is kind of like is it's like if Stardew Valley was an MMO. So the initial
definitely
built out was kind of like a farming simulation game, but then we added in some interesting like Web3 elements to it too. Like to have a farm, you have to have one of our NFTs. There's some interesting loops where if you don't have a farm, you can go and visit other people's farms, and you actually get like a percentage of what they farm on top of your farm. So there's this interesting UA loop there, where if you have a farm, you're kind of incentivized to do some user acquisition of your own to come to it. And that's led to some interesting stuff. But yeah, we've had that iteration of the game for about a year. And what's interesting about it is we didn't have any incentives baked into that core loop besides just those basic game loop ones for a little bit. And the focus for the last year was basically, retention and traditional game metrics. Basically, we wanted the game to benchmark against other browser games in Web 2 before we started to move on to the next stages. And the cool thing is in like the last 60 days, we've started to get a bit more traction, which has led to
75,000 daily active is pretty darn good traction.
Yeah. And that's led to some other things too. So the interesting part is we've had an ERC20 that's been live into this game loop for the last year. And once we started getting more attention, the token started increasing the incentives to play the game a little bit, right? When you played our game before, you earned like $2 to $5 a month. And with this new traction, we've seen that token price rise a little bit, which has made the earnings in the game more than before. And what that leads to is new user personas coming in leads to really interesting growth loops in the flywheel there if you manage it properly. Also leads to a lot more headaches when it comes to things like, actors, bots, multi-accounters, and I mean, even that, new player persona that comes into the game when you have those incentives, like you see with Diablo with gold farmers, or RuneScape, the Venezuelan gold farmers as well too. You'll start to see that amplified in a token economy even more because the friction's less. It's kind of some of the expectation of these gamers too. So yeah, now we've been getting to experiment to see like, okay, what does the Web3 incentive actually do for growth? Can it lead to funnels to monetization? What are the new things that we need to think about when it comes to management of this economy? That's been some of the fun and like the interesting stuff that we get hands-on things with. My take in Web3 gaming is, I think everybody knows that in Web3 gaming, the game needs to be good, but there's a whole other half of the problem set that is equally as difficult that I just don't think you can plan for at times. And it's some of these things that you just have to iterate and build and test with to actually get the solutions under control, or the problems under control, and think about new solutions too. So we've done some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, we've definitely talked to a few projects over the years where they had a vision of what the token economy was going to be and what was going to happen when they actually launched it, and then 5 minutes after launch the first bots started sniping their token liquidity, and they're like, it's definitely a bit terrifying that first time you're kind of out in the wild there.
Yeah, what's that Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Right.
It's felt like that a few times, definitely. This is a great time for, if you're watching us here in the video, pause it and go check out pixels.xyz. You kind of get a better idea of what we're talking about here. Sign up, give it a play, and then come on back to the video, and we'll definitely keep talking about a lot of the content that's in there. So I would love to chat with you a little bit about the differences in kind of Web 2 gaming and the incentives for players in Web 2 gaming versus Web 3, where you have this real money currency that can be extracted, and there is a value that players can pull out of it. And kind of how do you balance that design mechanic around having a token, having a currency in the game that interacts with the game elements, drives the incentives of the game forward, without having too much of that value extraction kind of null all of the power of the economy that you're building?
Yeah, totally. So I think you need to first start with this like lemma or thesis that when you build something of value, there is real new value being created, right? So games don't have to be Ponzi's, right? If you build a game, people like it, enjoy it, and play it, there is real value that you can actually distribute in interesting ways, right? In the Web 2 paradigm, the value that you're creating normally gets captured by the game in the term in like the form of microtransactions and free to play, or things like that. Like the game studio is capturing like a lot of the value being created in that game to monetize and profit. The Web 3 paradigm is more like re-experimenting with that, because in the Web 2 gaming world, if you want to grow a game and you want to build a profitable game, basically what you're doing is you're charging your users money, and you're spending that money right back on ads to acquire new users. It's extremely true formula. It's scientific at this point. A lot of these game studios, they barely even look at the game. It's just like, tell me the pure metrics. What's the ARPU in this genre? What's the retention? What's the engagement? Okay, now we know we have a winner.
My user acquisition costs is 10 cents higher than my LTV. Then we sell the game and put it aside.
Exactly. So what's interesting is like the Web3 opportunity is cutting out the middleman of ads and user acquisition sometimes, where it's like, can you create incentive structures that help your game grow? Where you're saying, maybe we're going to take less direct profit here, but we think we can more efficiently grow the ecosystem if we create the right incentive structures to, help our users help us grow, to bring in incentives for people to play the game as well too. What I like to frame it as is like, there's two things that games will always pay for. It's users that are, playing for a long time, and it's getting new users, right? There's clear precedence of this in Web 2 gaming. This is what people want, right? So if you can think about your incentive structures in ways that mock that as well too inside of your game economy, then you potentially have something that is more efficient or really competitive against Web 2 games at the bare minimum, like user acquisition. when it comes to like the incentives that you're trying to drive for your company, which is typically, profit, revenue, all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, we've been thinking about it a lot like that, essentially. It's funny, Pixels became a play to earn game by accident in the last couple of months. Our earnings in the game went from like $2 a month to like 20 to 30. Just because, when you have a live token economy, you start to experiment with like the distribution of that value. Two, speculation can come into the ecosystem and kind of boost that temporary value. In the long run, the real value probably lies at the real value, right? Or the token value probably lies at the real value. But Web3 is in this interesting spot right now where speculation needs to be something that is under control, but it also can kind of be a superpower in the early days.
Yeah,
you achieve some of the goals that you want that you wouldn't be able to early on, especially when it comes to user acquisition, all of that too. Real value still needs to be there. You don't want too much speculation in the ecosystem, but also
definitely turn on you very quickly and leads to very long sleepless nights.
But if you played in the MMO too, speculation is kind of a part of MMOs anyways. I was in trading guilds and stuff in MMOs for a while where we would flip different items in RuneScape, do all this kind of stuff. Like that is actually legitimately fun gameplay sometimes too. So shying away from that all the time maybe isn't always the right approach as well, but it's definitely a balance, right? So for us, when we think about managing speculation, we are really, really transparent in our communication around everything that we do. I think that's part of it. One of the mistakes that early Web3 games made was leaning a bit too into some of the narrative and setting player promises wrong.
Yeah.
Where if you start to encourage people to quit their jobs or do all this to play a game, then
you see ads for that on Twitter.
Yeah. Then you get into some like more dangerous territory where it's like maybe the speculation is driving more of the value of the token than the real value. And obviously, real value will probably take precedence in the long run, right? But yeah, there's interesting ways to bootstrap stuff early on as well too.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about your land. It sounds like the land is kind of the core base for the users, and it's kind of where their experience jumps off from. Can you talk a little bit about that and how users onboard to get that land and what your general findings have been with it?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of these discussions to note on this too is free to play versus like own to play as well too.
Yes.
We have a 5,000 land NFT collection that we dropped back in December 2021. And that's where a lot of our core systems are kind of built around. But you can't support a game on only 5,000 users either, right? Yeah. So you need convincing progression towards all of this kind of stuff as well too. So how we view our land right now is we kind of view it as like a progression through the game. Where if you start as a free-to-play player, we still want to give you this path of progression. We want to give you this path to, have a great time. And then this land is kind of like that end progression. So it kind of fits in with our thesis of what we think needs to be on-chain and off-chain as well too. This is something that we actually have moved around a lot on. At first, I was a huge fan of like full decentralization. I was a decentralization maxi. I was like, everything needs to be on-chain. Every single component of our game needs to be on-chain, every action. And what we found is our users actually didn't really care if everything was on-chain. And it actually wasn't providing much value to our users either. Yeah. And it was super expensive. It made the time to build everything way longer. And yeah, just for the value that it was giving, just wasn't worth it. But what we found is there's essentially a couple different asset classes inside of our game. There's items that players earn really quickly, and there's really no use for them outside of the game. There's liquidity in the game for them because, people want these items to progress through the game. But there's no need for these items to be on chain, essentially. They're really low value. It would cost more in gas to trade this item than it would to have this item, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's no use for them to be outside of the game either. Like, it doesn't make sense for somebody to be using like a berry that they earn in our game, or like a, scarret, like any crop in our game outside of our game. So that can be off chain, and that's completely fine. And we've actually introduced land that's off chain and free to play as well. And it's kind of progression through this as well too. But this land as a higher tier resource and kind of be an anchor in the economy, where it's actually very nice to have something that's limited, not per player. When you think about like resource generation, like higher resources as well too, gives us kind of like a max global cap of resources to manage inflation, to manage some of the things coming in. It gives people a thing to work towards as well too. And those are the kind of items, like those higher value items in the game that actually make sense to have on chain, because people want to trade these. Like, there's progress that can follow them. There's like a market. There might be uses outside of our game for other games to want to use them as well too, or like give benefits to people who own this. So having that interoperability is a nice add-on as well too. And yeah, there's like secondary marketplaces that might potentially exist around these essentially.
Interesting. So you're saying that the land, although you did do a drop early on, and it's kind of one of the core NFTs for the project, there is this free-to-play component where you can go in and basically get a free piece of land and kind of start playing the experience, and then hopefully you like it, and then progress up into more advanced ranks.
Exactly. So like this free-to-play land, it's not as good. It doesn't generate as like full of resources.
Yeah.
But it's
free.
It's free. Yeah. And then it's also necessary when we think about syncs in the game too, because if we only built syncs or like use cases around the higher tier land, then the free to play players, they don't really have anything to do, and they would just be selling all the resources.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think it's a great philosophy. I think a lot of games, very early on were set to this barrier to entry. You had to buy a $400 NFT to be able to even log into the game. I found that to be kind of frustrating. I didn't think it was a great experience. A lot of the people that are buying those NFTs at that point are the speculators, and they may never even log into your game. So you're kind of immediately really narrowing down your potential user base. But I think when you open it up, you let everybody come in, give it a try. You're really, you're kind of hanging your hat on the merits of the game and the gameplay. And I think most game developers will agree that if you've made a good game, you want to put as many people into it as possible to be successful.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something to note too, where it's like there are speculators that hold like our NFT land. And what we've been trying to focus on is like creating incentive structures that make it better to actually have it in use, and also making it easy for these people to have other people do it if they need to. Like our preference is that 1-to-1, like it would be a player to like a dedicated player to owning each of these like 5,000 lands, and creating incentive structures that make the land better if it's actually being used. Out of the game kind of helps that. Also creating systems that allow people to like manage other people's lands, things like that as well too. Because if we have this sitting empty, it's not doing anybody any good, and it just creates this artificial scarcity for no reason really. So that was something that honestly took some community alignment around as well too. Like some of these speculators did not like some of those policies. But you can't make everybody happy. And our, focus is on making sure that the economics are sustainable, because we didn't think about that, then, this game wouldn't even matter at all, right?
The speculation is nothing if the game fizzles and dies. So do you guys have like a scholar system in place, or is that something that the community is kind of built on its own?
Yeah, we haven't done that in our own. And that's something I've been debating if that's something we want to put in or not. What I would prefer is to create systems that like make the game more accessible to the people that want to play from the beginning. So this free play loop as well is important to us. And then, one thing that's interesting is like we have these battle passes that we've been selling that give you more access to the game, more premium features, like more earn opportunities. Sell those for like $35 for 3 months right now. One thing I've been thinking about a lot with these battle passes is more price discrimination around them. So like we might start tiering some stuff like that a bit more, right? Because a $35 entry point is fine for somebody in the US. In a developing country like the Philippines, it's actually quite expensive. But then you can also start to play with some of the other sides of the components too, where it's like, if we tiered this down, made like a battle pass that was $10 instead, also had less earnings associated with it, then there's something interesting there, right? So there's different levels of price discrimination, also earning discrimination that we can probably do based on geography. That we'll probably start to experiment with soon.
You guys could also take a look at like a social currency on that, where if somebody has a piece of land and maybe they encourage people outside the game or people inside the game to come to their land. If you hit those certain tiers, you unlock a social battle pass.
Yeah, so there's an interesting system that we just put in place, somewhat controversial, but it's actually been extremely effective for multi-accounting and bot prevention. We call it reputation. Basically, one of the biggest issues in Web3 gaming is, bots and multi-accounters and cyber-hackers. And not a lot of games like to talk about it because it doesn't always make them look good when they talk about it, right? But it's one of those key issues where if you don't solve it, it's going to be pretty evident. And your game will immediately be unsustainable if you don't put in systems that prevent extraction in that degree. there's a difference between one person writing a script for a game and automating some of their stuff. We don't like that, but then there's a huge difference between that and somebody who can make 1,000 accounts and start to extract currency. So we had a couple of like systems that we were doing before where it was kind of a data science like approach. We would basically look at games, or we look at players, we would see some of their behaviors, we would like do a bunch of ban waves. That's not like a very fair system. It feels bad to get banned randomly. And yeah, we caught a lot of false positives in that. And it was just like a game of cat and mouse. What we've done instead is created this new system called Pixels Reputation, where essentially we let you connect to some external websites. So we've been working with more and more partners. Like if you connect to Mochaverse, this partner that we've been working with, who is trying to build out this Web3 reputation system across multiple games. If you do YGG Gap Quest, if you have some like Ronin in your wallet, if you have like Ronin identity or Ronin name service name, all this kind of stuff will increase your score, your reputation score inside of our game. And that means we can trust you a bit more when you start to play the game from a fresh account if you have some of these things connected. And it's also a lot more difficult for bots to do all these connections. And more things that we add like this, it makes it more and more difficult essentially. So the whole idea is like developing systems that allow us to trust early users quicker so we can give them more privileges in the game economy. We kind of gate game economy from people who have low reputation scores. They can't trade with other users. They can't withdraw their tokens until they, increase their reputation score high enough. And then what's interesting too is we have all this in-game data that we know how these bad actors tend to act like. So what we see a lot with bots is, they'll make 100 accounts, they'll funnel all their funds into one account, they'll withdraw. We can actually create systems inside of our game that penalize that behavior, lower your reputation. Like if you're a high reputation player, you're trading with a fresh account, we can lower that reputation programmatically. And that's actually done a huge, huge favor to cut back on some of this bot detection and some of these like multi-accounters as well too. And it's funny because whenever you do something like this, you'll get angry botters in the Discord being super upset. And I think that's a good metric of success, right? When you have some people angry about it, it probably means you're doing something a bit right.
Yep, you got the loud minority in there screaming at you. Definitely a good sign. Do you so on the topic of bots, do you think that all bots are bad? Is there kind of a scenario where as developers we can look to leverage that, leverage those bots, make use of them? Because they're not going away. It's not something that's going to all of a sudden stop, particularly as we keep adding in more ability to extract value from the games. What are your thoughts towards, actually putting those bots to work for you?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting use case of games that are fully on chain, and there's autonomous worlds, all this kind of stuff where making a better bot is the game, right? And yeah, that's an interesting concept. That's not the route that we want to go early on, but there is this reality that bots are getting really good at playing games. Like bots can play Counter-Strike 2 now competitively. So to try to say that your game is bot proof is pretty naive in my opinion.
Yeah.
No matter how complex the game is or game systems are, if there's an incentive structure for people to do it, they'll figure it out basically. So again, it's like the one-to-one isn't so concerning compared to like one person making 1,000 accounts. So that's what this reputation system's kind of trying to avoid, where it's more like if you can stop that or make that harder, and start to incorporate other pieces of identity online across the internet, across Web3, across other games, then you really, really cut back on that impact, essentially.
I think it's a really intelligent approach to it. That's great. So we got a little bit of time left here, and I'd love to kind of talk about some of your experiences in developing your blockchain technology. And I know you mentioned that you were working with the Ronin network. What has your experience been with them? What have you thought about that?
Yeah, totally. So we actually did something that was, again, kind of controversial a couple months ago. Now that we've done it, nobody's questioned it. We moved from Polygon onto the Ronin network. And the reason why we did that was because there's a huge user acquisition problem in Web3 gaming. It's really, really hard and expensive to get new users in the ecosystem. And like some people have this approach of doing the hard work of marketing the Web2 people, trying to get them into Web3. To me, that was kind of a losing battle. We were experimenting with that. Like, you have to convince these people why Web3 gaming is interesting. It's a really, really high CAC. Like, a lot of these wallets or the infrastructure providers in Web3, they're paying like $50 to $100 in customer acquisition cost to acquire new users in the Web3 from the Web2 space. And that makes gaming very unviable if you have that high of a user acquisition cost. So what we think about a lot is the path of least resistance, right? How can we make our lives easier and go after people who already are really interested in Web3 games? And the truth is, Ronin Network is really the only network of users that have actually played Web3 games before. Ronin has onboarded millions and millions of players into Web3 gaming, which is really hard to do, very expensive. And they have a network of players who already are interested in Web3 games. It's funny because, Axie DAU was down from its peak, right? Axie DAU at one point was like 2 million, which is crazy. But they still have all those users onboarded into that ecosystem. They have wallets, they have the Ronin token, like they're ready to go and play games, and they're still actually, very easy to reactivate. So that's kind of the thesis behind the Ronin chain. I've long thought that the relationship between chain and game should be more like publisher to game rather than this technology solution to game. The reality is basically all scaling solutions for Web3 gaming are technologically almost the same. Like, I don't care if it's, ZK groups. I don't care if it's whatever. I just care, like, can we get more users onto the game as a game, right? Costs are like something to think about, but honestly, if you really solve the on-chain versus off-chain side of the equation, really not even an issue anyways, because we don't have that much on-chain that we're paying for in terms of gas now that we've kind of figured out like what needs to be on-chain and what doesn't need to be on-chain. So for us, it's again like user acquisition and support. And we've seen some great success moving the Ronin already. Really, that was a difference maker for us. We went from like 5,000 DAU to like 70, 80,000 DAU in a couple of weeks, just moving chains basically, because they have, a great ecosystem. They have users already onboarded. And then what's cool about Ronin is there's aligned incentives between us and them, right? Like, the better that we perform, the better the Ronin chain performs as well too, because, they have a better narrative. They have like more and more games that will come into the ecosystem and even strengthen the network effects further. And that's what we were looking for with the chain for a long time. It's like, are there scenarios where we can align incentives where growth is beneficial to both of us, and there's, a beneficial side of like both of us growing essentially. And we found it with them. They were the ones who like got it earliest on. And I think other chains are kind of waking up to that fact now that, it's more like a publisher relationship, but the Ronin team really gets it. And then the other advantage with them too is, again, they're the only team in Web3 gaming that's actually experienced Web3 gaming at scale. And that comes with a whole host of knowledge that really nobody else has. They're able to save us months of development time right now by helping us work through some of the problems that we have, because they've already seen all of these problems. And that's huge. If I wasn't talking to them every single day, we would have done some silly things that they already messed up on and have learned from essentially. So the knowledge that they're able to pass down onto us is priceless. And I don't know where else we could get that from.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like they are acting like a publisher for you. How are you kind of communicating with them? Is it just like you have an open Telegram channel and you guys are just bouncing back and forth, or is there like a whole Ronin community of developers?
Yeah, I mean, we have a Slack channel that's open. Like, we're talking every single day. I'm talking with founders every single day. Jeff, Alex, all of them, they've been so helpful and supportive, especially with like some of our other goals too, around like, the token, fundraising, things like that. The amount of value has been intense, amazing, and I'm super, super grateful that we get to work with them.
That's great. That's definitely a very high level of praise, I think, for other developers that are listening. So as we kind of wrap up here, I would love to, maybe get your thoughts on, where things are going to be going in the coming year. You said that you guys at Pixel, you have a lot of great stuff coming in the works. Is there anything you can talk about?
Yes, we have a much bigger token launch coming up, which is the really exciting thing. And, this is going to bring like a whole host of new problems too, right? But that's the fun stuff that we're really excited to get to. It's going to be like a proper token generation event, like, the whole shebang. And to me, that's when we finally really get the playground to experiment with what Web3 can actually do when it comes to user acquisition, when it comes to like retention incentives and all of that. And it's going to be, a lot of iteration experimenting over the next year. But that's like, finally the fun stuff. I feel like this is what we've been working for 2 years. Like when we set out to build a Web3 game, like full focus was, token launch, because that's the cool stuff to me. And it's finally just around the corner.
The anticipation. I remember I've done a couple of token launches, and it's counting the hours. Like, only 564 more hours left. Well, good luck to you on that. I know it's going to be a very exciting time for you guys. That's awesome.
Yeah, I won't be sleeping much the next month, but that's how it goes. I'm excited. I'm ready.
So what do you see kind of happening in the larger Web3 gaming community? Do you have any predictions or thoughts on what's going to be coming for this year?
Yeah, so it looks like a lot of people are, having that same questioning that we had of like, okay, am I in the right ecosystem to be building in right now? And I think we're going to see some more like aggressive strategies from chains in general, and a bit more support in those ecosystems as well. I think a lot of these chains realize now that we're coming out of a bear market that the support around keeping projects in their ecosystem is important, and helping these games grow is important as well too, especially now we're finally starting to see these games come to life. We're like 2 years after that last bull run now, right? It's like a normal game development timeline where a lot of these games are actually going to start shipping and releasing. But that's going to be super fun too. I'm really excited to see like all these games come and iterate. It's funny, like there's a lot more games coming. I still don't see the space as super competitive because again, like nobody really knows it's going to work. So yeah, a lot of these games are going to have to iterate, try things out a lot. Like some people have some great ideas and we'll all share and like learn from each other. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be like pretty cool to collaborate with all these other people building in the space.
That's awesome. It's a very optimistic view for the year coming in. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on as we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I think like the big thing for us is like there's theoretical tokenomics, right? And then there's practical tokenomics. And yeah, the practical side is quite difficult. So my take is you just have to have a live token to actually be able to experiment with this, and speed of iteration and testing things out is going to be the most important metric for this metric of success for people in this space, in my opinion. So yeah, I'm excited to see what people come up with, and I'm really excited to see like some other ideas in this space too. It's cool being a front runner, but would love to have some other people, here with us experimenting as well, so that we can all learn from each other.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all very much for our attendees that are viewing this. We appreciate you coming and watching, and a special thanks to our guest, Luke Barwikowski. We appreciate your insight. It's great to talk to somebody that's actually out there in the trenches, building great games. As always, if you have questions about the topics we covered today, or you're looking for help with your economy, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, Luke, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks so much.